Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I have been playing this game non-stop since I got it, which by the way was a day early because I got my copy in the mail a day early, so thank you GameStop. I also got the new Tears of the Kingdom amiibo, which is a really cool amiibo if I do say so myself. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And while uncommon, this isn't the first time that we've gotten a direct sequel featuring the same Link. The first one that comes immediately to my mind is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which is a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. There are a couple of Game Boy ones as well, I believe Oracle of Ages and Seasons. Those are sequels if you look at them in that light. They could be parallels, but that's its whole other can of worms. My point is that Tears of the Kingdom plays a lot like Breath of the Wild with its own additional features, but overall it is basically The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. So if you did not like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I don't think Tears of the Kingdom is your type of game. So there are additional mechanics, but overall the assets and the game engine are all carried over from Breath of the Wild, along with your horses. But it's kind of weird that that's the only thing that carries over from your save file in Breath of the Wild. I feel like other things should maybe have carried over as well, but maybe the developers didn't want you to start off with an advantage and have the game feel easy at the beginning because you have additional stuff. But I just feel like your compendium is like a album of all the pictures that you've taken, and it was kind of this whole thing in Breath of the Wild to try and take a picture of like all the items and all the enemies and everything like that, and it's this whole thing. So like I feel like something like that could have carried over, but no, just your horses, but at least that's something. Now the only horse that I would typically use in Breath of the Wild is Epona, and that was unlocked via the Zelda amiibos, and so you know I could just get it the same way in this game as well, so not a big deal for me. But yeah, especially at the beginning of the game when I was playing the first couple hours of Tears of the Kingdom, in my head I'm thinking like, oh, okay, so it's just more Breath of the Wild. Now this fleshes out more over time and it kind of set itself apart as its own unique game, but especially at the beginning of the game before you get exposed to all that stuff, it can feel maybe a little underwhelming, especially this first starting area. I felt like it wasn't as great as the Great Plateau in terms of like introduction. Basically, the whole thing, the whole twist about this game is there's a bunch of like floating islands in the sky, and then there's these cavernous depths below Hyrule. So this adds a whole lot more playing field to an already huge existing world of Hyrule. So you start off on this floating island in the sky. I think this is a good time to say, in terms of spoilers, I'm going to be refraining from giving any major story spoilers, but I feel like the game has been out long enough now that I can talk about some gameplay spoilers, and you will be seeing some potentially spoilery things on the footage. So if you are sensitive to that type of stuff, maybe go play the game first, and then we'd love to have you back here when you beat the game. But yeah, it starts you off on this floating island in the sky, and it isn't as impressive as the Great Plateau, and I think that's kind of the theme, at least for me, playing this game compared to Breath of the Wild, where when I first started playing Breath of the Wild, everything was so new and fresh and all these great ideas, and while Tears of the Kingdom is just more of that, which is great, it doesn't really wow me with much newness. There are moments that definitely blew me away, and I'm not going to get too much into those, but it definitely sets itself apart in some ways, but I don't know, I'm just looking for that novelty of Breath of the Wild, and this being a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, it was lacking in that. Now, the story is never the main focus in these Zelda games, I would argue. I would say that the main focus of Legend of Zelda is all around exploration, discovering new areas, new temples, dungeons, things like that. And so, while the story isn't the main focus, I would definitely say that I enjoyed the story in Tears of the Kingdom more than Breath of the Wild. Now, Breath of the Wild was basically like Link waking up 1,000 years later after this huge cataclysmic event, and he's trying to uncover what happened. He basically has like amnesia or whatever, and he's trying to figure out like what happened and then eventually go defeat the big bad. In this game, he obviously has all his memories, and overall the tones of the big bad, like I said, I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but the tones are more like dark and twisted, and I find that to be more intriguing to me. And all of the story beats are happening real time in a sense. And yeah, basically like in terms of like in Breath of the Wild, you would find these memories of Link to help him remember what happened 1,000 years ago. In this game, there's a similar mechanic, and I'm not going to tell you what they feature, but yeah, that's like one of the objectives of the game, is you're going around and collecting these memories to figure out like the story of what's going on. You do have new powers in this game. You've lost all your other powers, like creating bombs and the ice blocks and the stasis. Instead of those abilities, you have new abilities because Link has a new arm, and this arm comes with new powers. And the biggest one, I'd say the biggest thing that sets Tears of the Kingdom apart from Breath of the Wild is the ability to fuse objects together, and you can essentially like build things whatever you want. So this could be like you could fuse a bunch of rocks together if you want, and there's a bunch of like mechanical machines called Zonai devices, and you can fuse all these Zonai devices together to build like a car or a little airplane or a robot. I've seen some awesome creations online, and these devices are powered by this resource, I forget what it's called, like Zonai Charge or something like that, and it's basically like a battery. Now you can upgrade this battery later in order to power your devices for longer, but basically like you hit these devices and it'll start depleting your battery, and depending on like how many devices are being activated at once, that's how fast it will deplete. That's probably the biggest thing in terms of fusing, but you can also fuse your weapons and your shields and your arrows with additional components in order to like craft new gear. And basically like during the beginning events of the game, all the weapons got all corrupted and destroyed, and so they're a lot weaker than in Breath of the Wild. So you need to get a little creative in terms of fusing, and sometimes this can be really silly. Like if you have a super long pole arm, basically you can fuse another pole arm to the tip of that, so now you have like you're holding a pole arm that's 2 lengths of a pole arm, like a giant huge stick. Or if you wanted to, you could get like a club and fuse like a giant boulder to the end of it, and now you have this hammer. And so you can get a little creative with this, like in terms of like launching an arrow. Basically, in order to create fire arrows, you add like fire fruit to the end, which makes it flaming, or an ice arrow. Or on your shield, you can do this thing where you can fuse like a sled or a cart to it and basically turn it into like a skateboard. Or you can add a light to it, and when you hold out your shield, it'll blind enemies. So you can get a little creative with this. I found that this system did eventually start getting a little tedious in terms of having to make your own weapons in order to make them good, and that didn't really help with the weapons always breaking for me all the time. But that system is kind of controversial in terms of the durability of your weapons, because over time they will break. But I do like that it's constantly having you use new weapons to kind of keep things fresh, so you're not always just using the Master Sword like in previous Zelda games. So I'm of two minds with it. I could go either way, and this fusing ability, it's cool, but at the same time it's a little clunky, because if you want to fuse an item that you're holding in your inventory, it's kind of tedious just searching through your bag, scrolling through all of these different items to find like the item that you want to fuse to your sword or whatever, and then drop it and then fuse it all together. It's tedious, and then it breaks after maybe like 20 swings of your weapon. And so it's almost like I feel like whenever I defeat an enemy, I stop and see whatever like component I want to attach to my weapon then, because I know if I end up picking up that item, I'm never going to fuse it to a weapon, and it'll just sit in my inventory until I use it to, I don't know, make like an elixir or use it as materials to upgrade my armor. One of the other abilities that you have is actually really cool. Basically, you can like launch yourself through any overhanging ceiling. As long as it's like flat enough and wide enough, you can basically launch through that ceiling and go all the way to the top, wherever that ceiling exits out. And this works for most ceilings, and this was really fun to kind of break the game in a way, because you could like use your fuse hand, your master hand I think it's called, to like suspend a board above you, and then you can like launch up into that board. So it's really good getting that vertical height. And then it's almost like I heard this analysis on a podcast, but basically like pop out of the ground above you, kind of like Bugs Bunny, and the whole game is frozen. So if there's like enemies around you, they're all frozen until you decide. It will ask you like, hey, do you want to go back down, or do you want to go all the way through this ground? And once you do that, then the game resumes back to normal. So you can do some really fun shenanigans. I know it doesn't sound like that great of a ability on the surface, but that's actually pretty cool and pretty fun once you get used to it. The one that I tended to forget about, this other ability, is the ability to rewind objects. And there's some cool applications for this too. For instance, if like a bad guy throws a rock at you, you can rewind that rock so it launches back at the enemy. Or a feature that I use this a lot for, kind of to maybe cheat on some puzzles, is basically like you use the master hand to like lift up an object, and then you set it down, and then you hop on top of that object, and then you can rewind that object, and then that object will lift you back up in the air. Or like sometimes I'd almost hand myself puzzle pieces, like in these shrines you can hand these spheres that you drop into the ground, and you need to use these spheres in various ways in these shrines to activate puzzles. And I would like lift up this ball like across the cavern, and then bring it back to me, and then rewind and hop over to the other side and then grab it. So I'm like handing myself that puzzle sphere. So that's mostly what I use to utilize it. I wish there were more ways to apply this rewind, like maybe be able to apply it to actual enemies and make them like walk backwards. Obviously this wouldn't work for like big bosses, but for like little guys, I wish I could actually rewind living creatures. I think that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, with these tools, especially with the fuse ability, things can get really silly really fast. Obviously, if things don't work out, it still is pretty funny. A lot of the times I'd spend all this time fusing together this giant rocket ship, only to find out that I had fused the rockets the other way, and so I ended up like launching myself backwards instead of forward. Or like you always think that something's gonna work, and half of the time it doesn't, and it just like whenever it fails, it's pretty funny as well, because it's like, of course that just did it. That's just the way that it worked, and I should have known that. But other times when it does work, it's actually pretty cool. Like you actually build a working little airplane, and you're flying through the air, traveling between all these floating islands in the sky. Or I've seen some pretty creative things. I feel like I'm not creative enough to utilize this ability, and about halfway through the game, I kind of stopped using this ability because I found that the time it took me to try and create something wasn't worth actually using the machine that I've built, because most of the time it will like break, or I get in a spot where I need to get out of the machine, or, you know, it just felt like there were easier, quicker ways of tackling a problem than trying to assemble this whole machine together in order to solve it. Even for like traveling, I feel like I'd rather just run on foot than make like a little car, because the battery dies, or I have to go off of a cliff or something like that. But that's the cool thing about these Zelda games, is it's just such an open, sandboxy type of game that there are so many different approaches to tackling traversal and combat and puzzles. There's so many different options, so just do whatever best suits you. And for the most part, you usually don't need to really be building these big fancy contraptions. And later on in the game, they give you like basically like these blueprints that automatically create contraptions for you if you're not the most creative type. So there are ways around this ability, but I feel like that ability is the thing that sets Tears of the Kingdom apart most from Breath of the Wild. Now, the other one is the aforementioned Sky Islands, and I do like the Sky Islands, but they aren't as numerous as you might believe when playing the beginning of the game. There are islands like all over the sky, but after you can probably spend maybe like a day traveling to all of them if you have the means to do so. Now, some of these islands are way high up in the sky, so you need to get a little creative in terms of like how you get up there. There are different means to get altitude, like sometimes giant rocks fall from the sky, so you can climb on those giant rocks and then rewind the rocks so they launch you back up. The map covering mechanic in this game, basically like the towers in Breath of the Wild, you would climb them and then they reveal a section of Hyrule for you on your map. In this one, these towers actually like launch you straight up into the air, and they're a good way of getting yourself a little bit of altitude as well if you need to. But still, some of these islands are really high up, and I feel like these are the main reasons on why you would have to build these machines. You have to build these giant rocket ships and stuff to get you higher up, because some of them are so high up, and unless you have like an upgraded battery system, you're probably not going to get up there unless you, I don't even know how you would get up to some of these places. I haven't even got up to some of the tallest Sky Islands, but I feel like I really like the aesthetic of these Sky Islands. They're very autumnal, and you're close to the sun, so everything's bright and sunny, and the music is just kind of quiet and chill. It's cool being up in those Sky Islands. Environmentally, that's probably my favorite place in the game, is being up in those Sky Islands. Now, once you get to a couple of those Sky Islands, you kind of realize that the layouts do start to repeat. Like, oh, okay, this is an island with a little launcher to launch you up in the air. Okay, this is an island where you just fight one of these mini bosses. And so there's not a lot of diversity in these Sky Islands, but they're still fun to travel around. The other new thing that I mentioned was the depths. And the depths, I'm a little mixed about. The depths are basically like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. They're like the Upside Down to Hyrule. So it's like a direct parallel universe to Hyrule, where all the mountains in Hyrule are like depths in the depths, and then like every location of a shrine is going to be something called a light route under in the depths. And these light routes basically work like the towers on Hyrule, where they reveal a section of the map. And they also shine a bunch of light, which is really helpful, because without these light routes, the depths are like pitch black. You cannot see anything. And so you have to get a little creative in terms of like revealing light to see what's going on. The biggest one being these like little plants that you can shoot with arrows or drop on the ground and hit them, and they reveal a section of light. But the most reliable way is to find these light shrines, basically, and they are always revealing a section of light on the map too. Now, like I said, every shrine on Hyrule is going to have one of these light routes. And so there are a lot of light routes, and I definitely recommend not trying to tackle all the depths at once. Like, okay, because normally that's how I play games, right? I set an objective, okay, I'm going to do all of this first, and then I'll move on to whatever's next. Usually I do this for any open world game. So at first, when I first started playing this game, I thought, okay, I'm going to just explore the surface level of Hyrule, get all of these towers to expose all of the maps. So I did that first. That's usually what I end up doing in these open world games. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get all of these memories to figure out what's going on in the story. And that was really fun because I like the cinematics a lot, and the story is pretty good. Then, just like in Breath of the Wild, there's like 4 main objectives that you can do on each corner of the map. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go do all of those. So it's like the main story part. Now keep in mind, all of this stuff is optional in Zelda games. You can just go straight to the main boss if you want to. Obviously, you're going to be vastly underprepared, and so you have to be very skilled and not get hit once, but totally possible. But that wasn't my goal, right? I'm not speed running, so I wanted to get exposed to as much of this game as possible. So I did that. I did all 4 of these main objectives, And then I decided, okay, I'm going to go to the depths, because before it was kind of scary because it's all dark, full of these powerful monsters. So I decided I'm going to go do that and do all of these light routes to expose all of the map on the depths. But there are so many. There's like 100 and something light routes, and honestly the depths can be a little boring after a while because there's not a lot of variation. Now there's a couple things. There's like monster camps and there's mini bosses. Getting the light routes is always satisfying, and I'd say arguably the coolest thing about the depths are these hidden gear pieces. Not going to get too spoilery with this, but there's hidden chests like all over the depths, and the gear it's actually pretty cool because there's a lot of references to previous Zelda games. Like, oh wow, that's the gear piece from this game, you know, that's a reference to this character from this game. So that was always fun. I love those references as a Zelda fan. But other than that, I felt like the depths were kind of boring and probably one of my least favorite parts about this game. Now, I feel like the developers didn't want you to spend too much time in the depths at once as well, because they introduced this new mechanic called gloom. In the depths, there are like this red pool of goop all over the place, and if you stand in it, then you acquire something called gloom, and gloom is basically like depleted hit points that you cannot recover until you eat a certain item or you go up into the sun and it removes the gloom. So it's almost like once you get hit by an enemy, you get afflicted with gloom. Once you stand in this goop for too long, you get afflicted by gloom. So you really can't spend too long in the depths before returning back to the surface anyway. So I recommend, if you're playing it, maybe just do like a couple light routes every once in a while and then go back to the surface so you don't get burnt out, because doing all light routes just in one go, if that's your one objective, I would get fairly bored doing that. That being said, there are some really freaky enemies in this game, especially in the depths, because they have all this gloom essence around them. And like that, I don't want to get too spoilery about the enemies, but like, yeah, there's some creepy stuff in the depths, and it doesn't help that like anytime you dive into the depths, it makes this deep, daunting noise, like, and it's actually pretty intimidating until you get up, you build up Link enough so you have enough hearts and upgrades. And that's the next thing I want to talk about is upgrades. This system works basically just like Breath of the Wild, where every 4 shrines that you do, you can turn it into like a heart, which is like 1 hit point, or upgrade your stamina wheel so you can run longer, so you can climb for a longer amount of time. And shrines are pretty fun. I didn't do all of the shrines, but I want to say I did a good 80% of the shrines. And shrines are various tasks. If you've never played Breath of the Wild, they work pretty much like that, where sometimes they're puzzles regarding a certain mechanic or ability. Other times they take away all your gear, and then you have to defeat all the enemies and like build up your inventory. Those are always kind of fun. So other times the main objective is simply unlocking the shrine, and when you walk into the shrine, you just get a treasure chest and you get the token to upgrade, and it'll take like 4 of these tokens to upgrade. So yeah, sometimes like you have to, if you get a gem, like the green gem, to activate the shrine, there's a little laser beam and it will show you where you have to take that gem to activate the shrine. And I like that they don't make you do this whole other shrine once you finally unlock the shrine itself. If you can't tell by now, it's a huge game, and I feel like it will take you even longer to beat this game than Breath of the Wild. There's a ton of stuff to do. I feel like I've put in maybe 90 hours into this game so far, and I still feel like I haven't even scratched the surface. There's still so many of these side quests that I could potentially do. It was the same thing with Breath of the Wild. After I rolled the credits on Breath of the Wild, I saw all these things online like, whoa, you can do that in Breath of the Wild? That's in Breath of the Wild? Cool. And I feel like it'll be the same thing with Tears of the Kingdom as well. I felt like once I hit around the 60-hour mark, and especially once I started exploring the depths, my motivation for the game started depleting a little bit. Like, I still really liked the game, but like, I was kind of ready to be done. And so I decided that's when I'm, okay, my motivation is lowering. Maybe I should go finally take on the final baddie and finish the game. But once I did that, I'm like, oh, this game's awesome. Because the end, again, no spoilers, but the end is really cool. Lots of fun and memorable moments in the end game. And I felt like my motivation just got resurged. And I'm like, whoa, that was fun. I'm ready to play more of this. So I put in another 20 hours after I beat the big baddie and rolled the credits. Now, just like in Breath of the Wild, once you beat the big baddie, the game doesn't continue on after that point. It basically rolls the credits and then boots you to right before you take on the big baddie, which makes sense, but sometimes I'd like to see like the after effects of the world. But I guess we got that here from the after effects of Breath of the Wild, so I don't know, maybe there'll be a sequel to Tears of the Kingdom someday, and we get to see the after effects of this game. But yeah, lots of shrines, lots of Koroks. Koroks are these tiny little seed things, and basically if you help enough of them, do a little puzzle or something like that, you can upgrade your storage capacity for your weapons or your shield and things like that. Now, typically these Koroks, you have to do menial little tasks, like sometimes you stand on an area and you'll shoot a couple balloons, or you see a flower and you grab it, and then it's just like a trail of flowers that you have to go grab. But a big part of the Koroks in this game are you'll encounter a Korok with a giant backpack, and he says, I need to get to my friend, and you have to basically carry this Korok that's overloaded by this backpack to a green smoke signal somewhere in the distance. And this got a little tedious eventually, because like I'm going to a shrine or I have like a destination in mind and I see a Korok, and it got to the point where I'm just like, another one, because there are so many of these Koroks who need to get to their friends. But you can get pretty creative in terms of like how you get this Korok to his friend. And one of my favorite means of reuniting these Koroks is I basically just use my fuse hand to attach a rocket to this Korok, because you can attach anything to his backpack and then just launch him in the direction of his friend. And more often than not, this ends up creating more work for me because they like get off trail or something like that. But sometimes, this has happened like 2 or 3 times, the Korok lands right next to his friend. It's like perfectly placed, and that is so satisfying and funny. And also, it's just funny seeing this Korok launch up into the air and go, wah! It's silly. Other times you can like attach him to, you can build like a car and like attach him to the car and take them. Or let's see, what are some other means? You can roll them down hills to get to their friends. I've seen some creative stuff online with these Koroks as well, and I feel like other people share the same sentiment as me, where these Korok things can get a little annoying eventually, but they attach them to a cross and say like he died for our sins and stuff like. They do some silly things with these Koroks. I definitely recommend looking online to just see like what people have built with this fuse hand and how do they torture these Koroks. Other than the Koroks though, there's a lot of interesting NPCs. I feel like since the events of Breath of the Wild, civilization has kind of rebuilt itself, and every NPC that I talk to always has something interesting to say, whether it's like a hint about an item or like a potential side quest, or every NPC will point you in the direction of something interesting, which is cool. There's an NPC that is all around Hyrule, and he's always holding up these signs with unique designs, and he's like, I'm gonna hold this sign up for my boss. And so you have to grab like some wood around you and kind of set the sign up so then it will stand up on its own. So then you set up the wood around the sign, you kind of like fortify this sign, and then you'll talk to the guy and say, hey, try letting go. And if the guy lets go and the sign holds itself up for more than like 3 seconds, he'll just give you like some rupees and a couple items. But that's a fun little detour always when you're on your way to some destination. There's always like something fun along the pathway, and that's why I say like this game could honestly last forever. This is like the perfect deserted island game because there's so much to do, and if you just have the patience for it and you don't get burnt out like I can get sometimes when I play games, then I mean this is the perfect game for you. I just feel like in most games my my cutoff point when I start getting a little bored is maybe 20 hours. Games up to from 1 to 20 hours I have a good time with, and then my interest starts to wane. So the fact that I put 80 hours into this game, usually happily to do so, I feel like speaks miles for this game and just how fun it is. And especially if you're very creative and you love to explore, it's a great game. A couple other things, rupees are pretty hard to come by, and I feel like purchasing things can get very expensive, especially gear. So most of the time, whenever you do like a side quest for an NPC, they say like, hey, great, thanks man, here's 100 rupees. And while that may sound like a lot of the gear that you can buy from like shopkeepers could cost around like 1,000 rupees. So that's a lot of side quests that you need to do in order to get rupees. Another reward for side quests that you can get are designs for your paraglider. I feel like amiibos unlock cooler designs than the quests that you can do. And the amiibos actually unlock some pretty cool things too. But the cool thing about the amiibos is, sure, you have a chance to get some cool armor, but if you explore the depths, you can probably find that same gear. I think that the only things that are exclusive to the amiibos are Epona, the horse, which you can't even attach like harnesses to or anything like that, and I think skins for your paraglider. So I really like the Twilight Princess skin. It's a really cool design, and that's the one that I stuck with. So whenever I did like a side quest and I got like a different paraglider skin, okay, whatever, you know, no big deal. I kind of would have rather had rupees. But yeah, I did this whole quest just to try and get a bunch of rupees, where these Sky Islands have like these tablets, and you basically have this translator who's trying to Rosetta Stone up some ancient Hyrulean language, and he wants you to take pictures of all these tablets up in the sky. So I did that, and like every time you take a picture of one of these tablets, you'll get 100 rupees. But even when I did all that and like sold all my diamonds that I would accrue, I still feel like I was always hurting for cash in this game. Earlier I mentioned the 4 of these main objectives that you can do around the map, and these are basically like the same thing as Breath of the Wild, but these are basically like the what are the beasts, the ancient beasts or whatever in Breath of the Wild, but the dungeons for this game are a lot more interesting than those beasts. I really can't remember their name, but the dungeons, everyone was getting really excited because they're like, oh, this game has actual dungeons, just like the older Zelda games. And while they do, they kind of don't. It's not like a traditional Ocarina of Time dungeon where you get the keys and you get the item to get through the dungeon, and then you fight the boss well, you do fight a boss at the end. But in terms of the dungeon, they're a little more freeform than that, very Tears of the Kingdom style, where you can tackle different objectives in these dungeons at your own pace. So it's better than the divine beasts, that's what they're called. It's better than the divine beasts, and they are their own unique dungeons, but it's not like a traditional dungeon in the Legend of Zelda sense. After that, you get an ability just like you did after you beat the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild, and I won't get too into depth with those, but I just want to say that the activation for these abilities is a lot more tedious than in Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, most of this stuff was mapped to a single button, or it was just like a passive effect. So like in Breath of the Wild, Mipha's effect was basically like a fairy. So once you lost all your hit points, she would heal you back up. Or one of them is launched like you hold the jump button and you'll launch straight up in the air. In Tears of the Kingdom, it's a little more clunky, but that's all I feel comfortable saying at that point because I don't want to spoil too much. Tons of just like mini little caves all over the place that you can explore though. A ton of wells. There's this whole side quest where this person is obsessed with wells, and she'll like pay you 10 rupees for every well that you explore, and sometimes these wells can end up being this whole little cavern in and of itself. So lots of fun exploration. Like I said, I could spend forever playing this game, and honestly I could spend forever talking about this game, but I feel like I'm going to wrap this up here. Obviously, if you can't tell, I really enjoyed this game, just like I did Breath of the Wild. I am going to give this game a 5 out of 5, obviously, if you couldn't tell. I do think I'll spend maybe a little more time playing Tears of the Kingdom, because I know once I stop playing it, it's going to be difficult to come back, because there's so many little hotkeys and shortcuts and button commands and controls that I would need to like re-immerse myself back into the game in order to like get myself back in the groove. Otherwise, I might have to restart this game if I ever do want to come back to it, because I feel like once I spend a week away from this game, I boot it up and then I'll wait, what was I doing? How do I do this? And I'll just get confused. So I feel like this is really a game that you just need to play without any side distractions from other games. So I feel like I could potentially spend another 5-10 hours playing this game, and then once I've moved on for at least several years before I restart the game. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!